Hi, welcome back to Life Connoisseur with me, Carolina. So, it's been a few weeks since the last time I recorded, and to be honest with you, between surgery and the holidays, things definitely got super crazy around here. However, I will say I did sit down and think about recording a few times because I've had this topic swirling around in my mind and honestly polluting my thoughts the last couple months. But every time I sat down to do it, I just couldn't do it. And I don't know why. There was like a mental block there. I decided today, though, with it being a new year and a new day, that it was time to confront that and to go ahead and record it. For me to be able to better explain what this has been doing to me, I have to kind of go back a little bit. If you have been here since episode 1, you know that I had a pretty rough upbringing. With that being said, my biological mother was in and out of my life quite a few times when I was little. And as you can imagine, it created some abandonment issues. But the way that I was able to survive a lot of that was by creating like an emotional disattachment from people, especially if they caused harm. I'm able to quickly disassociate and just no longer be bothered by it, which is really not a healthy way to process things, but it's been what's kept me going thus far. So, when I was in my early 20s, I had given my biological mother a second chance. Well, at that point, it was more like a third or fourth chance. But I gave her another chance because I had my son and I wanted her to be able to experience being a grandmother. I also wanted her to be able to see what it was like for me to be a mother and for her to maybe see that, this is what it should have been like versus what she gave me. Well, that only lasted for so long because when he was about 2 years old, she decided to do her usual, which was to get up and move for a man. She packed up everything here in Colorado and she moved to Seattle. Well, my son had established a really good relationship with her, and he actually nicknamed her Taba. When Taba moved, he was devastated. And he started having like these extremely high fevers out of nowhere. We kept going to Children's trying to figure out what was wrong with them. We could not figure it out to save our lives. Well, during this time, my bio mom decided to reach out one day, and she heard my son in the background screaming for her. And he kept saying, I want my Taba here. And nobody could really understand what he was asking for. I knew what he was asking for. He was crying for her. He wanted his grandmother to be there, to console him, to make him feel better. But just like she had done to me, she was nowhere to be found. Instead, she called and heard him, and somehow I feel like got a sick pleasure out of hearing him scream for her. Because then she told me, "Oh, he misses me. How sweet." And that is when Mama Bear came out. And I said, "No. Do you hear how he's crying for you? That's how I cried for you for years, hoping that you'd come back, hoping that you would care, hoping that you would someday protect me. And you never did. You never showed up for me. So from here on out, you are dead to me. You are not to call me. You are not to come to my house. I will call the police on you if you show up at my property. And do not go near my child." And her response was, "Oh, you're just tired. You've been through a lot. I'll go ahead and call you tomorrow." And I said, "No, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago. Stop giving you chances." That was our last conversation. And that was about 21 years ago. And since then, as I've continued to grow and mature, that's part of me now. The ability to just break away from people when they harm me. I've even broken away from people to avoid causing them harm in a sense. I have a biological brother, and my brother and I had to walk away from each other when my daughter was born 13 years ago. I love my brother so much. He and I went through hell and back together. I always had his back. I always made sure he was cared for and that he knew that I loved him. And of course, my son absolutely loved his uncle. Everybody used to call him Big C. But after I had my daughter, he had established his own little family. He had a son, and he had a partner who used to actually be my friend. It became very apparent that we were growing apart in a sense. And I remember the conversation just like if it was yesterday, because my brother didn't necessarily hate my ex-husband, but he could definitely see the writing on the wall. The writing that I chose to ignore just so that I could give my kids the family that I never had with the dad I never had. And he saw it. And I, on the other hand, was not very happy with some of the choices he was making. But it was starting to create a lot of conflict in his household. And I just felt like it wasn't right. I wasn't going to subject my brother to have to choose between me and my family or his significant other and his family. So I chose to walk away. I told him if he ever needs me, he knows where to find me. And that was 13 years ago. I'm fortunate that some of my friends are still friends with him on social media. So occasionally I'll see a picture of him and he still has the same chubby cheeks. He's just older, but it's still my brother. And that was the first time that I actually allowed myself to mourn the living. Because when I walked away from my mom, it was easy. It was easy to walk away from somebody that was never there. Walking away from my brother hurt like hell. It was just like if he had died. All I was left with were photos and memories. And that was the first time I really experienced it. Little did I know it wouldn't be the last. Last July, I was going through a really bad time. I was with a department that it was just not a good place to be. And by the end of July, it had taken quite a mental toll on me. It had really made my anxiety skyrocket, my depression. I was losing weight, and I knew I was losing it. So one day I decided to reach out to my oldest son, and I asked him if we could all go paddleboarding on Sunday. So it was me, him, his fiance, my 2 kids, and we all went paddleboarding. And I told them the truth, which was I wasn't doing good mentally, that I wasn't in a good place. And I asked them to just be gentle with me and understanding. And they said they understood. And we carried on. We finished our day paddleboarding and all was well. Or so I thought. Because then a couple days later, my daughter got in trouble, like teenagers do. And I addressed it. I didn't address it correctly by any means. I had no emotional regulation. I was not medicated. Not that that's an excuse. And I lashed out at her. And I told her that if these sort of behaviors were to continue, that I just wouldn't put up a fight anymore. Then I texted my middle son and told him, like, hey, if you heard screaming, your sister and I just got into it. Well, then he said, I'm going to call my brother. And I said, that's fine. So he reached out to my oldest. They spoke. And then the next day, I put my daughter in therapy. And we went to therapy and started resolving things. And I had also put my middle son in therapy a couple days prior. And that was a rough ride to therapy. I cried there, I cried back. Like I said, emotional regulation was not something that I was doing very well. So I took my daughter to therapy and sorted out some things and came up with a plan. And I thought we were doing good. Well, then that Thursday comes along and my middle son tells me that his brother and the fiance are going to come over for dinner. And I said, that's fine. And that they wanted to talk about what had happened. I said, okay. Meantime, my daughter and I went and ran errands, and I ended up at Sam's Club at one point. I got a text from my oldest saying that they were going to be coming over for dinner. And I said, yeah, I'm aware. And I said, I'm at Sam's Club. Would you like me to pick up anything? And he said, no, my fiance and I are going to just be picking up Chick-fil-A. I thought that was a little weird because you said you want to come over for dinner, but okay. We arrived back home. They're already here. And I happened to literally get a really important phone call right as we walked through the door. So I came into my study and did my phone call. In the meantime, they were all in the dining area and I could hear them giggling and laughing. And so as soon as I finished my phone call, I joined them out there. My daughter decided to make pizzas. So she was making pizzas for us. And then as soon as she finished, I said, hey, the pizzas were in the oven. I said, hey, are you guys ready? Like, we can all sit down and start having this conversation. And that's when my oldest asked my daughter to excuse herself to her room. So she did. And then he turned and he looked at me and he said, what the fuck are you thinking? And I remember being in a state of shock. I'm very old school. My children are not allowed to cuss in my home. So I was just in shock. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, what was happening. Well, then the conversation continued that there was concern about their sister and the way I handled things and the things that I said. And I said, I understand, we're working through it and I'm trying my best. At one point, my oldest told me that if I could no longer care for his sister, that he and his fiance would petition for custody of her and that they would take over parenting. And I was just in shock. I just kept listening to everybody and trying to comprehend and really absorb what was being said to me. But it was very difficult because I had like 15 tabs open and I was just in my brain and I was trying to just process. Well, then at some point during the conversation, it was brought up that, my fire career was what was causing some of these issues with my daughter because of me being gone for 48 hours. And their solution was for me to quit my job, for me to quit fire. And I said, okay. And I kept listening. And then at some point in the conversation, it took a turn. My oldest began to say that I caused him trauma, that I was never present. I was pretty much a shit mom, that I never did anything for him, that he had to do all of it himself, and that even without me, he would have become the man he is today. And I continued to just listen because I could honestly still not believe what was happening. And then at that point, the fiance chimed in and she said, "Why aren't you crying?" And I was in shock. And what do you mean? And she was like, "Your son is telling you how he feels and he's opening up to you about all these things and you're not even crying." And I looked at her and I said, "I'm just trying to process what's happening. Like, there's just a lot happening right now. There's a lot going on in my head." And then the conversation continued. I can't even call it a conversation. I'd say the attack continued. And it hurt. It hurt for my son that I had raised a certain way for him to no longer be that person. And during this attack, I was told, like I said, that I need to quit my fire job. And finally I spoke up and I said, "Well, then who's going to pay the $4,400 mortgage on this house?" And they said, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. I said, "Is there a money tree in the backyard?" From my background in education, like, there's a hierarchy of needs for children to be able to grow into productive members of society. One of those is they need shelter and food. You also need love. You need nurturing. So I asked about the house and I was like, "Who's going to pay the mortgage? Is there a money tree in the backyard?" And that's when my son's fiance goes, "See, you just showed more emotion talking about your house and your money than you have this whole time that your son's been talking to you about his feelings." And I was just baffled. I was baffled that my sons, because my middle son was present too, would allow somebody who is not related to us, who is not part of our family, who didn't grow up in my family, to address me in such a manner that was disrespectful. Nothing was said. The conversation continued. I just remember sitting there the whole time, trying to process and just feeling my little inner child just slowly trying to disappear. And I didn't speak up for myself. I didn't argue. I just let it happen. After a while, my daughter came out and my son, my oldest son told her that, he was going to be there for her. And, he understood that, things are hard and, that they're going to help me figure myself out and, that things were going to get better and all these promises, all these things. And then they eventually finally left. I went to my room and I broke down. I broke down because I always thought I did everything right. I thought I gave my son the life that I wish I would have had. I always tried to be the parent that I wish I would have had. But apparently my right wasn't his right. And I had told my son at one point that, kids don't come with owner manuals. We don't get directions when they're born. We try our best. And that's what I did. I tried my best. My best apparently wasn't good enough. And it hurt because what he doesn't know is that every decision I've made in my life
since the day he took his first breath. Even before then, since the day I saw the 2 blue lines, was centered around him and his success, and him being better than me, and him achieving greater things. There's not a single decision I've made in my life that wasn't centered around them. I even have a tattoo on my back of a compass with his initial in the middle. That indicates that no matter what direction my life is going in, he's always at the center of it. But he never gave me a chance to say that. My wounded inner child never spoke up. Little did I know that that day that he left would be the last day I'd get to see my son. The following week was his birthday. I had given his fiance, it's either $200 or $300, I can't recall, for a mountain bike. So I texted him happy birthday, and then I said, I hope you enjoy your gift. He said, thank you. Then the following day was his sister's birthday because they're 10 years and 1 day apart. And we celebrated her. And then eventually her brother reached out and they set up a putt-putt date. So they all went. My 2 little ones, the oldest, the fiance. I was at work. And then let's go play putt-putt. When they came back, my daughter was upset. And I said, what's going on? And she was like, I just can't believe, what they said about you. And I said, what are you talking about? And I guess it had been mentioned that I spent $600 on back to school shopping for them. And my oldest and his fiance felt the need to make statements in regards to my spending and how I needed to be more careful, which I thought was interesting because there's no complaints when the $200 to $300 were handed over for a mountain bike. But, back to school shopping, that's where we draw the line. And I thought I did pretty well. Like $200 to $300 for Nike stuff for each kid. That's not bad. Not in today's economy. And then next thing you know, it's my birthday, August 26th. And I didn't get a text from my son until I think it was the next day or maybe 2 days after. He finally said happy birthday. And that's when it became apparent to me that the man who was texting me wasn't my son. It wasn't the man I raised. That the man who showed up at my house at the end of July was not the man I raised. Because the man I raised would have understood that I tried my best. He would have appreciated that even though I came from the background that I came from, I still tried to provide him with the best of everything. He always had the best clothes. He went to a private high school. He went to a private elementary school for a few years. Setting him up with that foundation is what got him to where he is today in grad school for chemical engineering, Colorado School of Mines. Me showing him what it was like to put in work and grit and to pursue higher education is what made him be the man that I raised. But the person behind the text messages, that's not my son. So then I spent most of September trying to figure out what to do, how to approach the situation. I worked with my therapist. And at the end of September, we had decided that we were going to set up some days and that I was going to shoot them to my son and see if he wanted to come and meet with me and her. And that way we could have a conversation and really kind of, hash out what had happened. Well, I had to cancel one of my visits and then she had an issue. And next thing you know, it's the beginning of October. And I got a text that said that I didn't feel comfortable not telling you this, but I'm getting married next week. And I read that text and it broke my heart. It broke my heart to envision my son, my first child, my baby, walking down the aisle without me. It broke my heart to know that I didn't get to witness it. So I came home and I told my middle son, and he told me he knew that his brother had told him about the wedding, but told him not to tell me. Which then a lot of things started making sense because my middle son had been going through some nasty depression and I could not figure out what was wrong with him. I had put him in therapy, but now I knew he had been harboring this secret for his brother and it was eating away at him. And then told my daughter, and she started to cry because she wasn't invited. I then asked my adoptive mom if she had been invited. She said no, she had no idea. My best friend had no idea. Nobody that had been there for him and supported him and loved him and nurtured him were invited to his wedding. And that's when my sadness and heartbreak began to shift. And I started to get mad. I started to get mad that this person that I had raised, my son, my first child, would now intentionally hurt innocent people for whatever reason. And that's when it got solidified that that definitely was not my son. And then I was definitely going to have to mourn him, because even though he's living, he's not the man I raised. The man I raised wouldn't hurt his siblings. The man I raised wouldn't hurt people that love him. And that was it. So I formulated a text. I told him how I felt about him hurting his siblings and family members. And I told him, you can hurt me. I mean, sadly, I'm used to it, but there is no need to hurt other people. I tried to understand the things that he had said, that he said I caused trauma and that I forced him to grow up too fast. And in the text, I just told him, I hope you're protecting yourself, and I hope that you know what you're doing. And if you ever need me, you know where to find me. My door's always open. And I never got a response. My best friend reached out to him. She didn't get a response. And that's when it started. That's when the grieving started. It's a grieving process to know that I didn't get to see him get married, that I won't get to see him graduate from grad school, that I probably won't get to see my first grandchild. And then it hurt me to know that the little person that I had protected so much didn't protect me. The little person that I tried to shelter from all the harm and all the bad didn't do that for me. My son knows about my past. He knows my innocence was taken from me. He knows that my father was taken from me. My youth was taken from me. And instead of trying to protect me, he's now decided to take away these other momentous events that I had been looking for my whole life. And that's his decision. My decision is to now mourn him, because he's not the man I raised. He's not the boy I loved. So this Thanksgiving was our first Thanksgiving without him. My first Thanksgiving in 23 years without my son at my table. This year we didn't go see Santa like we do every year. There's no Santa pictures. There's no gingerbread house contest. I could barely bring myself to decorate for Christmas, but I knew I had to for my two youngest ones. Try to keep some form of normalcy for them. But fuck, it hurts. It hurts to have to mourn somebody who's living, somebody who you know is across town and you can't reach them. It hurts like hell. Spending my first Christmas without him in 23 years, not getting to see him open gifts. It was really hard, but I faked it. I put a smile on my face. I did the things. I cooked. I showed up. I showed up as mom, because that's what I've always done. I always just try to do my best. But during this process of mourning my son, I realized that it was time for me to start mourning somebody else too. For the last 9.5 years, I've had somebody in my life, on and off, and I love him so much. But no matter how many times I try to show up right for him, it's not the right that he needs. And I realized that over the last 9.5 years, all I've done is continue to hurt myself and continue to hurt him and prevent him from finding his wife, his partner, and having children and the family that he deserves. So I made the decision that it was time to let go. And that one also hurts like hell. To know that that person is a phone call away, but you know you shouldn't make that phone call, or a text away, or a 30-minute drive away, but you just can't. It's time to just realize that that's a chapter of my life that is going to be closed. And maybe someday we'll cross paths again. Maybe someday we can show up for each other the right way. Just like with my son. Maybe someday I'll get to hug my son again. But I don't know. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what will happen. And that's the part that's hard too. It's not knowing what will happen, not knowing if my son's going to get hurt, not knowing if he's going to need us and we won't be there. Just like with this person, not knowing if they get hurt at work, if somebody will call and tell me, not knowing if either one of them misses me, not knowing if either one of them truly ever loved me. It's so hard because it's just like mourning somebody that's dead, but they're not. They're here. It's just not right. My right isn't their right. My best isn't what they want, what they need. So I have to let go. I don't know how long it will take. I don't know how long this process is supposed to take. Because in the past, I never really let myself sit with it. I never really let myself process it. I would just put it in a box and tuck it way down in there and just continue about. That's not healthy. That leaves you with like 40 years of unhealthy baggage that you've been carrying around. So this time, I'm feeling it, feeling every moment, replaying every memory, looking at the pictures, listening to the songs, laughing at the silly moments, all of the inside jokes, just realizing that that's all I've got now, the photos and the memories, and that I've got to be okay with that because that's all I get. So I'll continue this process and we'll see how long it takes. In the meantime, I can honestly say I don't wish this even on my worst enemy. Mourning the living is not for the weak. And if you do have to go through it, circling yourself with friends and family that loves you helps immensely. And I'm fortunate. My daughter is amazing. And I know she can tell that I'm hurting. I can feel it with her longer hugs and her more often check-ins on me and making sure that mama's good. And same thing with my middle son. I just wish they didn't have to see me like this. Like I said, I try to hide it. But sometimes it just becomes too much. But they're amazing. And I'm very grateful. So, like I said, if you have to go through it, surround yourself with family and friends that love you. And honestly, even reach out to me. I'm always more than happy to listen, to be there. But I think for today, this is where we're going to leave it. We're going to leave it with the memories of my son and of my partner, on and off partner, the last 9.5 years, and just all the photos, the good memories, the music, the experiences. We're going to leave it with just hoping that nobody else has to mourn the living. We're going to leave it with, I'm still processing. We're going to leave it with, I thought I did everything right and I tried my best. And just focus on the good. Because the bad's already passed. And even though it still hurts like hell, even though the mourning's going to continue, it's better to always think about the positive and remember the good. So, with that being said, remember to always be kind, make good choices, and stay safe out there. Ciao.